Okay, so if you get your instruments, if they're to hand, and just play a little. And what I'm interested in is mainly two things. One is sound production, so just a few slow notes, maybe a fraction of a slow melody that you've been learning and you like, and only a really short fragment of that, and then something fast for coordination. So if you like, I'm looking at sonority and then coordination. So you go ahead, and I'll just give you a few minutes for that. So, and feel free, those of you who aren't with instrument, feel free to sing or to speak as well, because I think it's what I love about Feldenkrais is that we do some work in a very often unusual way, unusual positions, and then of course as musicians we want to know, well, why should we be doing this? And just the simple act of you playing before or singing before and after hopefully will demonstrate that. So I'll just give you another minute to play something or sing, and of course I can't hear you, so feel free to make as much noise as you like. So it's one of the nice things about having Zoom. Great, lovely, so I can see some of you singing and playing, that's really nice. And whatever you're playing now, I want you to remember, because we're going to come back to it at the end. Lovely. Okay, so hopefully you've all had a flavour. Oh, some of you setting up, but feel free as I talk in this next bit, if you didn't get to play already, to just play a little, and if you have, then just pop your instrument back down. So just I guess a question or two around, or a thought or two around why is this valuable for us as musicians, this method. So if, as I see, movement is really, it sounds ridiculous perhaps, but if you think about it, when we're performing or playing or singing, we are moving. It's just at the end of that movement we want a result that's sonic, that's sound, that's music and performance, but actually it's still movement. So in some ways, when I became a practitioner, a Feldenkrais practitioner, I didn't feel that there was a huge gap from teaching the violin to teaching Feldenkrais, because I am still teaching movement. And so when we refine our movements, we can refine our techniques on our instruments. And what's nice about doing Feldenkrais lessons away from the instrument is that you are able to work in a more neutral space. When we pick up our instrument, we all have habits, or we come to our instrument, or we open our mouth to sing. We have habits that immediately jump in, and for the majority of us. And then when we put the instrument down and we work on a movement without our instrument, then for most of us, just moving ourselves, as you've been doing with my wonderful colleagues in the last days, has less emotional or less effort in the tone of it. There's less, that you have less associated with it, because obviously for many of us, we've been learning our instruments since a young age. So we play with those ideas and those concepts that we take with us through life. So would you pop your instruments down somewhere safe, and we're going to start this lesson on the floor. So in a Feldenkrais lesson, we are one of the many strands that we're thinking about is how do we look after ourselves, and how do we take care of ourselves even in challenging positions and situations. And so I asked you very strongly, if something hurts in what I'm asking you to do in this next lesson, don't do it. You have various options. You can move slower, you can move smaller, and you can move less frequently, and you can also do everything in your imagination. This will have as much effect, although it's much more tiring for our brain. So what we know is that the neural pathways are triggered, neural pathways and neurons are triggered when we imagine something just as much as when we actually do it. So your self-care is of your primary concern. And this will be more and more important as we go through this particular lesson. So please listen to yourselves. Great, I'm going to just end the poll now. Okay, great. So would you like to lie on your back if you haven't already got there? If it's comfortable for you, have your legs long. And if it's not, then feel free to have your feet standing and your knees in the air. And have your arms by your sides on the floor. Usually in a Feldenkrais lesson we like to take measures. Every Feldenkrais lesson is like a little exploration, a little experiment. And so we have how you felt before, and then we ask you to try and recall some of that at the end of the lesson and through the lesson as we go. So let's start with where you are right now. So I'd like you to notice, how do your shoulders rest on the floor? And by that I mean, which parts of your shoulders rest on the ground? Is it the bottom of the shoulder blade? And you can imagine a hand, because our shoulder blades are more or less the shape and size of a hand. You've got two of them, like hand-sized shoulder blades, on the back of yourself on the ribs. So, and you can think about the top and the bottom and the middle, and I'm curious as to where that is for you. And we can also think about what's the quality of our resting. Do your shoulder blades press into the floor in a calm and even way? Or do they feel like bony and pokey, or something else? So what's the quality of how you rest with your shoulder blades? And then if you expand outwards and think about the line from your shoulder blades down your arms to your fingertips, what's your sense of length on the two sides? Does one arm feel longer than the other? And what about volume? Do you have a sense that one arm feels like more than the other? Or one thing I always like to think about is one arm clearer than the other? Is it simply easier to sense one of your arms than the other arms? And let's bring your attention to your back. How much of your back rests on the ground? And we all have these curves within our spine, which we've been talking about over the last days. So where are your curves, and where do you press into the floor in your back? And we should probably define back really as well. So we normally think of the back as just above the pelvis up to the top of the shoulders, and part of that is also your rib cage. So how much of your rib cage makes contact with the floor? You can see a few people wiggling to sense more easily. And if we think about the midline of our spine, and our spine goes right from the coccyx, which is just above the anus, so really low in ourself, through the sacrum, that's in through the pelvis, through the lumbar spine, that's the 5 vertebrae that don't have any ribs attached, and then your thoracic spine, that's the part of the spine which has your 12 ribs, your 12 sets of ribs attached to them, up through the cervical spine, where you've got another 7 vertebrae to the skull. So if you imagine that long line, which takes up an enormous part of ourselves, going all the way to your head, which parts make contact with the ground and which parts don't? And coming back to the idea of your shoulder blades, how far from your spine are your shoulders? is one shoulder a little further towards the spine than the other, or a little further out? Do you sense that one shoulder is a little higher in relation to the spine than the other? Another way we can measure that is, what do you sense is the space between your shoulders and your ears? And what about the sense of space across your chest, at the front of yourself? And I've talked about length of your arms, but what's the sense of the length of the whole of yourself? So from the head, where your skull is touching the floor, down your back, including the arms as you go, down to the pelvis, through your two legs, right down to the heels. Great. And now we'll start some actual moving, because the moving is actually where we find it most easy to sense ourselves. And in fact, Feldenkrais is a bit of a genius for working that out, in that when we're moving, it's easier to feel us and ourselves than when we're still. So I'd like you to put the backs of your hands on the floor and choose your dominant hand. And only with the dominant hand, I'd like you to bring the tips of the fingers and the thumb tip towards each other to touch, and then to open again. So, and could you repeat this and make a movement where you have a really constant rhythm? And there are a few things, specific things I'd like you to do within this, which is make sure that the fingertips touch each other at exactly the same time, and it's all of your fingertips that are touching the thumb. So if you like, the thumb is the center of a flower, and the fingers go around the center, and they're all touching both each other and the thumb. Everything stays soft. And as you repeat this movement, can you find a slowness that's as slow as possible without being jerky? You know, when we find maybe you can even find that speed. Where's the speed where it's no longer possible to be smooth? How slow do you have to go to find that part where the muscles can't join together the individual movements of each muscle? And then make it just a tiny bit faster so you can find a real sense of smoothness. And when your fingertips and thumb tips touch, they're not pressing. It's as if you've got a butterfly and it's just resting on a leaf for a second before flying off again. So it's like they just come to touch and then they leave. So find a rhythm that makes sense for you. And notice what happens to your breathing as you slow down the movements of the rest of yourself, and you concentrate just on this hand. We call this opening and closing of the fingertips the bell hand in Feldenkrais. And you'll see many different variations in the in other Eastern movement practices. So continue to do this bell hand. And notice how your lungs open and close as you breathe in and out. And as you feel the expansion of your lungs inside the ribs, can you also sense what moves in your rib cage? So we can think about different directions as we breathe. We can think about the pressure changing on the back of the ribs and the spine against the floor, and you're continuing this opening and closing of the fingers throughout, and you allow the finger movement to really permeate through the whole of yourself. And we can think about the expansion of the ribs sideways into the armpits. So the opening and closing of your rib cage at the side of yourself. And then at some point as you go around the sides of yourself, it becomes the front. And we can think about the expansion of the front as we breathe in and out, right from the pubic bone at the bottom, all the way up, over your belly, over the rib cage, including your collarbone and your shoulder bones, your shoulder blades, all the way up to your throat and your mouth. Right. Let go of that for a moment and rest. So stop the movement of your dominant hand. And notice, is there any difference in how your two hands lie on the floor? You've been moving one. Is it just the fingertips that feel the effect of the movement? Or is it the palm as well? And the palm is really at least half made up with the bones of the, more than half, with the bones of the fingers. So those bottom part of the metacarpals. So, and what if you compare it to the other hand? Is there a difference between the two hands? And we've just been working with the fingers, but is there any difference for you in how that arm lies, or the shoulder on that side, or how your face lies on that side, or how you breathe into that side of yourself, your dominant side? I'll call it that, even though it may not be, but your dominant hand side. Let's move our attention to your non-dominant hand, and can you begin to make this bell hand with the second hand? So you bring all the fingertips, the pads of the fingertips together with the thumb. They all close around the thumb at exactly the same time. So you need to work on really coordinating that, and then allow them to open at the same time. So this is your non-dominant hand. How soft can your hand be? How soft can your fingertips be? And is there a difference in quality between the opening and closing of your fingers on the second side, your non-dominant hand, as opposed to your dominant hand? For most of us, the expertise of one is very different to the other. So let's alternate. A few times do your non-dominant hand, opening and closing, and then swap over and do the dominant side. Don't do them at the same time, but really, because you can't really compare then. But really see, what could you learn one to the other? Like the dominant hand has perhaps more expertise. It's easy for it to find these qualities of smoothness and fluidity. I always think of this as like a sea anemone, opening and closing, and underneath the sea, a very kind of tranquil, calming movement. And then, yet for me, my second hand, it's not as calm. It's not able to do it with the same fluidity. However, for me, it brings simplicity, because I use it less, or in a different way. It has a different experience to offer. Let go of both of those things, just rest for a moment. And notice, how do both your arms lie? Is there a difference in the fingers, in the hands themselves, the palms, in the arms, the shoulder? Your back. Is there anything to notice about the way you're lying? Come back to your dominant hand and begin again to make this bell hand movement. And this time, see whether you can go slower and smoother and more gently, soft. I think often we forget that softness can be a strength. And softness in terms of how we move ourselves is a way of making sure that our joints can slide around easily. And not, of course, that one always wants to be soft, but we want to have access to that quality. So I'm going to ask you to keep these fingers going. And I'd like you to see whether you can allow these fingertips to be the conductor of the rest of your movement in this lesson. So keep the fingers going, listen to the speed that you're doing with the fingertips, notice if it changes, and if it does, simply slow it back down again. Can you roll to one side and slowly make your way to standing, keeping your fingers going and keeping the movement quality the same as your fingers. And just notice, of course, for us, when we first do this kind of stuff, that's really hard to do. So just notice, as you get to standing, was that possible? How much was possible? And if you stop, don't worry. Just begin to do the finger movement again. Come to standing. Right. And great. Let go of the hands for a moment. And notice, how does the weight settle on your feet? So we've had our weight on our back. What's your sense of where your weight is on the 2 feet? Do you have more weight on one foot than the other? Is your weight more in the heels or the toes or somewhere in the middle? Is that different on the 2 feet? What's the shape of your breathing as you stand? We talked about how your rib cage can respond as you're breathing in and out. How is that different in standing? Come to your right hand and begin to do the bell hand again, so bringing the fingertips together. Allow the arm to hang down, so that the arms are hanging. It's just a simple bringing together of the fingertips and the thumb tip in this position with your right hand. And then very gradually I'd like you to raise your right shoulder at the same time. But I want you to move it in the same quality that you're moving your fingers. So you raise the shoulder up and then allow it to come down and repeat that movement. Notice if you've chosen a tempo relationship between your fingers and your shoulder or whether they're separate. So we're really splitting your attention here, something obviously as musicians we do all the time. So, but your priority is the fingers. Right? So as you continue to do this movement, can you sense the movement of the shoulder blade in the back of yourself sliding around the ribs? And then could you use your second hand to put on your collarbone and notice what moves in front of you in the collarbone as you raise your shoulder and you're still continuing to do the finger movement. And you're keeping the movement of the shoulder gentle and smooth. Stay within, I like to say 80% of your range. Don't go to the limits for this. Great. And if you take your hand more to the center of yourself, you can feel the joint, the sternoclavicular joint it's called. It's that little dimple just at the base of your throat. And that's where the collarbone meets the sternum. And where it's the only point where the shoulder is attached into your torso proper, into the rib cage. So see what moves there just in the center of yourself as you continue to do the fingers. The fingers are opening and closing. Don't worry if you've forgotten. Just join back in again with the fingers. And then take your hands out to the edge and feel how it's a much bigger movement here, but we don't necessarily sense it most of the time. Great. let go of that. And just sense, how do the two shoulders rest? Is there any difference between how they hang? So take your shoulders for a little walk as a way of a rest. We often do this. Notice is there a difference between the right side and the left side? And that might be, you can think about how much is moving, whether your arms are swinging more on one side than the other. How much movement is there in your rib cage? How much movement in your spine? Okay, great. Now, if you have a door jamb handy, then could you open your door and go to the door jamb? So the bit I mean is it's actually known as the door stop. Margot told me that, and that's the bit that's opposite the hinge of the door. So you open your door, and you'll see that there's the door frame opposite the hinge of the door. It's very neatly, it's kind of got three sides, so you can fit your back. I want your spine on the back of that door jamb. And just stand for a moment. You don't need to face me, I'm just going to be talking. Stand for a moment and notice how much of your spine touches the door frame. So we're opposite the door, on the door stop, if you have one. And how high are your shoulders? Can you use the door frame itself in order to sense the insides of the shoulders? And can you begin again with your bell hand on your right hand and raise and lower the shoulder using the door frame in order to help you measure how your shoulder is moving. Does it go directly upwards? Is it a little bit inwards as well? Great. Let go of that for a second. Now this next bit, I'm going to ask you to put your hand on your head, your right hand on top of your head. If this is uncomfortable for you, you can continue this lesson with the arm down as we were just doing. Okay, you just won't have that attachment. So can you begin the bell hand with your left hand? And you've got your right hand on top of your head. And your right hand is going to stay glued to your head. We've just made a little package of your hand and head. Can you begin to raise your right shoulder and bring it down again? So you're going to repeat this movement. And you've got the door jamb in between your spine, so you've got that extra sensory background of having something between your shoulder blades. Like, we never have that. So it's a really good way of really feeling what happens. Feel, and then ask your elbow to join in. So raise the elbow upwards, and your hand is attached. So you're still raising your right shoulder, of course, but it's now directed by the elbow. What's happening underneath the shoulder? You can feel the shoulder blade at the back sliding up and down. Can you feel the collarbone making its movements? And now that we've got the hand attached to the head, can you feel that the rib cage would like to get involved in this movement? Is your pelvis moving? Is there any connection between raising the elbow and the shoulder on the right side and the right side of your pelvis? And take a little break, bring your arms slowly down and go for another walk. Is there any difference now in how your shoulders are hanging? Great. And come back to your door frame. We're going to continue with the same side. So begin the bell hand with your left hand to begin this rhythm. And really, even as I ask you to do movements that are unusual, excuse me, and unfamiliar, see whether you can keep this left hand in your mind's eye. So place your right hand back on top of your head. So, and then begin to raise your right elbow and your right shoulder. And also, can you bring your left ear towards your left shoulder? So if you like, we're just making this movement a little bigger. Go gently, you've got your bell hand is still pulsing slowly, giving you the quality of movement that I would like you to look for in the movement of the bigger parts of yourself. Your left ear is coming to your left shoulder, and feel how that changes how you use your rib cage. As we tilt the head and the shoulder, it's asking for the ribs to be involved too. Perhaps you can feel the opening of the ribs on the right side. Can you feel the closing of the ribs on the left? And can you feel whether there's any difference in the weight on your feet? Do you shift your weight as you raise your shoulder and your elbow? And take breaks whenever you need to, I should say that. So if you need to have a rest from this position before I say so, please do. So just take a little break now. Go for another walk. Notice how the arms hang. Is there any change? Is there any difference in the whole of the right side of you as you walk? So the rib cage, your spine, the sense of weight as you go from one foot to the other. Great. Come back to your door frame. We're just going to play a little with this idea of changing weight. So bring your right hand on top of your head. Begin the movement of the bell hand on the left. And just see whether you can sink into that rhythm. Really make that's your metronome, if you like. But a beautifully soft, fluid metronome. And this time, as you take your elbow upwards, your right elbow upwards, and your right shoulder upwards, can you keep your weight fixed on both feet? So as if somebody was holding your legs. So you repeat this movement a few times. And notice if is there any difference in how easy this is to move when we fix the legs. And then can you swap over, and as you raise your right elbow and the right shoulder and you take your left ear towards the left shoulder, can you shift your weight to the left foot? And notice what shape does that make in the back of yourself. And what's happening to this measure of the straight line in between your spine? Sorry, at the back of your spine. Can you use this straight line? Obviously you have to move a tiny bit so it's not impeding your movement, but can you use the straight line behind you in order to help you feel what you're doing with your body? And then shift so that you're moving your weight onto the right foot as you take your right shoulder upwards. And the left ear comes towards the left shoulder. Great. Bring your arm down. Slowly, gently. Allow it to hang. And notice, is there any difference now? And could you take a little walk back to your mat? We're going to take a little longer rest in the middle before we think about the other side. And make your way back down to your mat. And as you make your way back to horizontal, what do you notice? What draws your attention now? Is there any difference in how your shoulders make contact with the floor? That quality of resting? Is there any change in which areas of your back, which areas of your ribs and your spine are resting on the ground and even able to sink into the ground and support your weight? Is there a change in your sense of length of your arms? How do your fingers and hands feel now? Is that different from the beginning of the lesson? What about the length of all of you? Is that something that's easier to sense? This idea of lines from the head, the back of the skull, down your ribcage, down the arms, down your pelvis, down the legs, all the way to your heels. Is that clearer on one side than the other? And what about the shape of your breathing? How's that now? Is there any difference in how much of the area of your ribs around the shoulders are involved, especially on the right side, this part of yourself that I've been making you work with? Come back to doing the bell hand with your dominant hand. And keep this going. Again, as you roll to one side and make your way up to standing. And see whether it's a different quality of rolling and getting up the second time round. And I just want to do a little on your second side so you don't go away completely lopsided. So come back to your door frame. It's a door stopping, but yet opposite the hinge of the door. And begin to do the bell hand with your left hand. Allow it to hang. So your arms hang down. Raise and lower the left shoulder. And the arm is hanging. You're not holding your forearm up. You're allowing the whole arm to hang downwards. So we're not holding up the arm yet. Just you can do the movements of the fingers with the arms long. So you're raising and lowering the left shoulder. And sense again the shoulder blade moving at the back on the left. And feel free to use your other hand to sense the collarbone on the left side. Is there any difference between the two sides? Was it, often we have one shoulder that's easier to move than the other. Did I choose your easy side first? Right, and then bring, this time if it's comfortable for you, and only if it's comfortable, can you bring your left forearm on top of your head so that your hand is hanging? If that's not comfortable, you can bring the hand on top and do exactly what we did last time. But if it is, bring the forearm on top of your head and continue to do the bell hand with your left hand. If you've got your hand on top of your head, if you've chosen the first option, you'll be doing the bell hand with your other fingers, the right fingers. And can you raise and lower the left elbow and shoulder in order to allow the shoulder to slide up and down? And we've got the forearm is kind of glued to the head as your hand was earlier. So you'll probably feel a tilting. So allow your right ear to go towards your right shoulder. So you're raising the left shoulder, the left elbow. You're continuing to do the bell hand, either with the fingers on top of your head or the other hand, whatever way you've chosen. And feel again how this asks for a movement of the rib cage, this opening and closing of the rib cage underneath the shoulder. And is there a shift of the pelvis as you do this? Is it a clearer movement having done this on the other side? Shift your weight towards the opposite foot, so towards your right foot. And of course, take a rest whenever you need to. As I'm going to continue talking, but take a rest, put your arm down whenever you need to. Great, I'm seeing people do that, that's great. So, and those of you who are still going, you just continue this movement and sense this opening of the ribs on the left side and the closing of the ribs on the right side. So bring your hand back up on top of your head. It's the left hand or left forearm on top of your head. We'll come back to the bell hand. And then shift your weight onto the left foot. And feel how this is something very different of the spine. You're raising the left shoulder, opening the ribs. And if your shoulders are clicking, that's just the synovial fluid within the joint. There's nothing to worry about. Some of us have noisier shoulders than others. Great. Let go of that. Bring your arm down slowly. And notice how do the arms hang now. You go for a walk. Take your shoulder girdle for a walk. What's your sense of how your shoulders move as you walk? Is there any difference in how your ribs are moving? Your spine? What a sense of connectedness through from the shoulders down to the feet, from the head down to the feet. Or what's your sense of the length of your arms now? And I've just come to standing somewhere. Is there a difference in the sense of space across your chest? Or in this, coming back to these measurements that we took at the beginning, the space between your shoulders and your ears on the two sides? And obviously we did a lot less on that second side, so I would expect perhaps less change. And what about the shape of your breathing? Is there a difference in how much of you breathes now? And what's your sensation in your fingers and your hands? And a general state of calmness, or just general state, I guess would be a better way of putting it. So just take a few moments to sense any changes you might feel. And then let's come back to the screens and we can have a discussion. And if you've got any questions or any comments on how that was for you, what you experienced, I'd love to hear them.